I found the receipt because of a coffee stain. It was a Tuesday, washed out and ordinary, the kind of day that feels like background noise. I had just finished my shift at the clinic and was sitting in the driveway, watching the soft drizzle gather on the windshield. When I reached down to grab an old travel mug from the door pocket, my fingers brushed something dry and crinkled. Paper, folded in on itself, stiff with the faint smell of cologne and car freshener. I almost tossed it straight into the trash bag I kept in the side compartment. Instead, I unfolded it, more out of habit than curiosity. The logo hit me first, a dark, looping H over the words Harborview Hotel and Suites. My eyes skimmed the rest on autopilot, room number, dates, total. Then they snagged on the line that sliced through my chest, 2 guests. Weekend couples package. The date was last month. The same weekend my husband, Daniel, had been in Chicago for a conference. Rain tapped lightly on the roof as the world narrowed around that slip of paper. The garage door was still open, framing the gray sky and our neatly cut front lawn like some kind of staged photograph. Everything looked the same, but my body knew something had shifted. My hands shook just enough that the receipt rattled against itself. I looked back into the car, trying to reconstruct how it had ended up there. This was my car, not his. Daniel usually drove his black sedan to work. He had borrowed mine that weekend, said the tires on his were worn and he didn't want to risk a blowout on the highway. I had told him to be careful, teased him about finally appreciating my mom car. The wipers squeaked once across the glass, clearing a path through the drizzle. I stared through it, but my eyes weren't seeing our street anymore. They were replaying a memory, Daniel kissing my forehead, suitcase in hand, the scent of his aftershave lingering in the hallway. His laugh when I told him to send pictures from the conference. The absent-minded way he had waved his phone and said, "You know I hate taking photos." The receipt was warm now, from my grip. The ink was clean, no smudges, no coffee stains. He hadn't meant to leave it. If he had, it wouldn't have been shoved half down into the door pocket, folded like trash. It was a mistake, a sliver of his other life slipped into mine. I folded it back up, slow and precise, pressing the creases flat. My heart was pounding in a way that felt too loud for the quiet car. For a moment I considered marching inside, dropping the paper on the kitchen table, and demanding an explanation. Instead, I slid the receipt into my wallet, behind my driver's license. The drizzle thickened into rain, soft and steady. I turned off the engine and listened to it, letting the sound wrap around the first crack in the life I thought I knew. My name is Rowan. For 10 years, Rowan and Daniel had been a single phrase, like a brand. In our small town, people said it the way they might say, the pharmacy on 5th or the good bakery near the river. We met in college, survived long distance, got married in a plain stone church with borrowed fairy lights, and built a life between overdue bills and takeout sushi. From the outside, it looked solid. Inside, there had always been hairline cracks. I noticed them in the small ways first. Daniel's phone, always face down on the table. New shirts with tags I didn't recognize, phrases like, client dinner, thrown out casually like spare change. He hugged me less often from behind when I was cooking. He stopped reaching for my hand when we crossed the street. We owned a modest house together, but his name was on almost everything that mattered. The mortgage. The business he'd started 3 years ago, a small but growing logistics company. I had helped him draft emails at midnight, proofread contracts, even skipped a chance at a promotion at the clinic to cover more hours at home when the business was new. It was our dream, he'd said, only the paperwork had never caught up to the language. If the marriage collapsed, he'd walk away with the company, the house, the narrative. Our families added another layer of weight. His parents adored the image we projected. They loved that we looked stable, responsible, presentable in Christmas photos. My own mother, who worked 2 jobs her whole life, used to say, you hold on to a good man, Rowan. There aren't many. She saw Daniel as proof that my life turned out better. Divorce, in her mind, was a sign of carelessness, of people not trying hard enough. So I kept the receipt to myself. For the next few days, life moved in its usual, measured rhythm. Morning coffee. Commutes. Dinner at 7. Daniel talked about suppliers and fuel costs while I chopped vegetables. I watched him more carefully, noticing the seams. The pause before he answered a text. The way he smiled at his phone sometimes, quick and unfamiliar. At night, I lay next to him listening to his breathing. I stared at the ceiling and imagined the room at the harbor view, what color the curtains were, whether the carpet was thick, whether he had laughed there the way he used to laugh with me. The receipt became a weight in my wallet, a pressed leaf of truth. There were moments I almost convinced myself I was overreacting. Maybe the hotel had made a mistake. Maybe 2 guests meant something else. Maybe this was a client meeting that got miscategorized, a group reservation split across rooms. I tried to string these maybes together into a safety net. But every time I opened my wallet, the hotel logo stared back, steady and unapologetic. What I stood to lose felt larger than any single betrayal. It wasn't just the marriage. It was the story of who I thought I was, a loyal wife, a partner, someone who could be trusted to keep things together. It was my reputation, my sense of competence, the years I had poured into being steady while he ran ahead building the visible parts of our life. One crumpled piece of paper had turned all of that into a question. The night before our 8th anniversary, I lay awake again, listening to the soft buzzing of Daniel's phone on the nightstand. He didn't stir. The screen lit his profile in pale blue. I watched the light fade, then blink back to darkness. I realized then that this wasn't just about catching him. It was about deciding who I wanted to be on the other side of the truth. The second proof came in the mail. It was a pale envelope buried under local flyers and a supermarket catalog, addressed to Daniel but with both our names on the account line. His credit card statement. Normally, I left those for him. He liked to manage the finances, liked the control of numbers and due dates. But that morning, the envelope slipped free of the pile and landed face up on the kitchen counter. The receipt in my wallet seemed to pulse like a heartbeat. I made coffee, listening to the slow drip, the low hum of the refrigerator. Steam curled up in the chill of the kitchen as I slid a finger under the envelope's flap and opened it. The paper inside was thin and faintly chemical to the touch. At first, it was ordinary: grocery stores, gas stations, online subscriptions. Then my eyes locked onto a series of charges highlighted by repetition. Harborview Hotel and Suites. Not once. Not twice. 4 weekends in 3 months. Each time, the amount was too high for a simple dinner or meeting. The line descriptions were worse: romantic package, champagne arrival, late checkout fee. I set the statement down and exhaled slowly, a long breath that left my ribs feeling hollow. There it was, intent, in clean black ink. This wasn't a misunderstanding, or a one-off lapse, or a client mistake. It was a pattern. A habit. A second life scheduled between our shared calendar events. I took out my phone and snapped photos, both sides of the statement, the dates, the hotel charges. Then I dug the crumpled receipt from my wallet and placed it beside the paper. The dates matched one of the charges exactly. The kitchen clock ticked loudly, the sound suddenly intrusive. Outside, a dog barked twice and then quieted, as if the world had decided to hold its breath with me. Instead of confronting Daniel, I opened my laptop. I typed Harborview Hotel and Suites, our city, and pulled up their website. The images were glossy: a balcony overlooking the river, candles, white linens. There was a page for Couples Escape Weekend, featuring photos of hands entwined across a table, chocolate-covered strawberries, a bathtub framed by flickering candles. It was all very tasteful, very deliberate. That afternoon, when the house was empty, I made one more search, this time for family lawyers. I didn't want revenge in the way movies showed it, screaming matches, shattered dishes, public scenes. I wanted something cleaner. A quiet realignment of the scales. When I finally sat across from the lawyer, a composed woman named Miss Patel in a small office that smelled faintly of lemon cleaner and old paper, I slid the hotel receipt and the card statement across her desk. She studied them, eyebrows lifting just slightly. "You've done the hardest part already," she said calmly. "You stopped pretending you didn't see it. We discussed assets, timelines, what documentation would stand in court. The business was technically his, but there were angles, my unpaid labor, the way we had commingled funds, how his affair and the hotel expenses could be considered dissipation of marital assets. If we track this over time," she said, tapping the hotel charges with her pen, "it strengthens your position. You don't need theatrics. You need records." So I began collecting. I forwarded myself copies of joint bank statements. I saved screenshots of calendar blocks labeled "client meeting" that aligned suspiciously well with hotel invoices. I quietly removed sentimental items that mattered most to me from shared spaces, my grandmother's locket, an old photo of my mother laughing, the hand-painted mug my best friend gave me in college. The ledger of our life together was shifting. Every click, every printed page felt like a stitch in a new spine I was sewing for myself. Daniel didn't notice the subtle rearranging. Or if he did, he mistook it for spring cleaning. The confrontation came on a Sunday, wrapped in the polite rituals of family. It was Daniel's idea to invite his parents over for brunch. "We haven't had them here in ages," he said, buttering toast as morning light slanted through the kitchen window. "It'll be nice. We can show them the new patio furniture." I agreed easily. By then, the divorce papers were drafted and waiting in Ms. Patel's office, quiet and precise. All that remained was timing. I spent the morning in a gentle rhythm, whisking eggs, slicing fruit, setting the table with the good plates. My hands moved from habit, but my mind was clear in a way it hadn't been for weeks. The hotel receipt and the credit card statements lay inside a plain manila folder on the sideboard, alongside printed bank records and a simple, unemotional summary Ms. Patel had helped me prepare. When Daniel's parents arrived, the house filled with familiar smells and sounds, his mother's perfume, his father's low voice, the soft squeak of chairs on the hardwood floor. We ate and talked about trivial things, the weather, a neighbor's new dog, a bakery that had just opened downtown. Daniel was relaxed, in his element, laughing and refilling coffee mugs. I watched him the way you watch an actor, aware of the script he thought he was still following. When the dishes were cleared and the kitchen sink hummed with warm water, I wiped my hands on a towel and returned to the dining room. The manila folder felt light in my palm. "Can we sit for a moment?" I asked, my voice steady. "There's something I want to talk about. All of us." Daniel glanced at me, faint confusion knitting his brow, but he nodded. His parents settled back into their chairs, polite curiosity in their expressions. I took the seat opposite Daniel and placed the folder between us on the table. The wood was smooth under my fingertips. "I'm going to say this as calmly as I can," I began. "I'm not interested in a scene. I just need the truth to be seen clearly." His mother's smile faltered. Daniel shifted in his chair. I opened the folder and laid out the hotel receipt first, then the line of credit card statements, then the bank summary. Each page landed with a soft, final sound. "This is the Harborview Hotel," I said. "These are the charges over the last few months. They correspond to weekends when you told me you had conferences or client meetings out of town." Daniel went very still. His father leaned forward, squinting at the papers. His mother pressed a hand lightly to her mouth. I could hear the faint ticking of the clock in the hallway, the sound suddenly loud in the pause. "Rowan," Daniel said slowly, "you're misinterpreting." "There's no need to explain," I interrupted, gently but firmly. "I have enough documentation to show a pattern. My lawyer has everything. This isn't a debate." I slid one last document across the table, a copy of the first page of the divorce petition. My name at the top. His name below. "I'm filing," I said. "On grounds of infidelity and dissipation of marital assets. I wanted your parents here because they've invested in the story of us. They deserve to hear the truth in a room where no one is yelling or lying." His mother looked from me to her son, eyes moist and searching. "Danny," she whispered. "Is this?" He swallowed, jaw working. For a second, I saw the performance falter, the polished veneer crack. But instead of confessing, he looked at me with a wounded sort of indignation. "We could have handled this privately," he muttered. "We tried handling things privately for years," I replied. "You handled your secrets privately in a hotel room. This is me handling my future." I wasn't angry, not in the way I expected to be. I felt something else, a cool, anchored clarity. The hotel logo on the receipt was just ink on paper now, part of a sequence that led logically to this moment. "I'm not here to humiliate you," I added. "I'm here to stop participating in a lie." Silence settled over the room, heavy but clean. His father sat back, exhaling slowly. His mother's shoulders sagged as she reached for her son's hand and found it unsteady. I gathered the papers back into the folder, keeping one copy of the receipt on the table between us, like a small, undeniable monument. Then I stood. "There's a copy of the petition for you in the folder," I said. "My lawyer's contact information is attached. I'll be staying with a friend for a few days while we sort out logistics. The house is still half mine, for now, but I'd like some space." Daniel stared at the papers, not at me. I left the dining room to the muffled murmur of his parents' questions and his stumbling non-answers. The air in the hallway felt different, as if something clogged had finally cleared. I moved out with 3 suitcases and a shoebox. The suitcases held clothes, essentials, a few framed photos that mattered to me. The shoebox held the concentrated version of the last chapter of my marriage, the hotel receipt, the credit card statements, copies of emails from my lawyer, and a single house key tied with a faded ribbon. I stayed with my friend Lila in her small apartment above a bookstore. At night, the faint smell of paper and dust rose through the floorboards, oddly comforting. We drank tea on her balcony and watched the city lights flicker on, one by one, like slow, patient stars. "How do you feel?" she asked one evening, her voice soft over the quiet hum of traffic. I thought about it. "Lighter," I said. "And strangely older. Like I aged 10 years in a month, but I finally caught up to myself." The divorce progressed not with fireworks but with paperwork. There were negotiations, mediated conversations with lawyers present, lists of assets and proposed splits. The affair never turned into a dramatic public scandal. There were no viral confrontations, no shouting matches in parking lots. There were just signatures, dates, and the steady dismantling of a life constructed from shared utility bills and joint tax returns. Ms. Patel was as calm as ever. The documented hotel stays, the credit card statements, and the way Daniel had used marital funds for his secret weekends gave us leverage. I walked away with a fair settlement, a portion of the business, enough to stabilize my own path, and a buyout option on the house. I didn't take the house. On the last day I went back, the rooms felt like a stage after the actors have left, props still in place, air heavy with echoes. I walked through each space, touching surfaces, not to cling but to say goodbye. In the kitchen, the clock still ticked steadily. In the bedroom, the indent on my side of the mattress had already begun to fade. In the driveway, Daniel stood by his car, hands in his pockets. The same car where I had found the receipt. We exchanged the last necessary details, mail forwarding, remaining bills. He looked tired, older in a way that had nothing to do with time. "I never meant for it to end like this," he said quietly. "I believe you," I replied. "But we live with the things we pretend not to mean." He nodded, eyes on the gravel. There was a moment where the weight of everything we'd been pressed in between us, dense and unspoken. Then it loosened. I took the house key from my pocket, the one with the chipped blue plastic cover, and held it out. It lay across my palm like a small, dull piece of metal, no longer an anchor. "You can keep it," I said. "I won't need it anymore." He looked at it, then at me. "Where will you go?" "Forward," I answered. I walked away without looking back. The air felt cool and clear on my face. My car, parked at the curb, smelled like my life again: coffee, faint traces of my floral hand cream, the soft scent of the new air freshener Lila had clipped to the vent. In the months that followed, I moved into a small apartment near the clinic. I painted the living room walls a shade of pale green that reminded me of early spring. I bought mismatched dishes from thrift stores and hung my own photos on the walls, images of rivers, trees, and quiet streets taken on solitary walks. I adjusted to the silence of a home where every object belonged to me. Sometimes, when I opened the shoebox, I would hold the hotel receipt between my fingers. The pain it carried dulled over time, edges softened by distance. It became less an emblem of betrayal and more a marker of transition, the moment the story changed. One evening, after a long shift, I took the receipt out to the balcony. The sky was streaked with peach and gray. I watched the paper flutter briefly in the breeze, then fed it into the small metal tin I used for burning incense. A match hissed to life. The flame caught the corner of the paper, crawling across the logo, the dates, the total, until it was nothing but ash. I kept the shoebox, but it felt lighter without that one slip of proof. I didn't need it anymore. I had reclaimed something more valuable, the quiet certainty of my own worth, independent of anyone else's promises. I had a key ring with only my own keys, a calendar filled with my own plans, and a future that no longer depended on someone else's honesty. Down on the street, a car door closed gently, and an engine started. I listened to the sound fade, then turned back toward my small, green-walled living room. For the first time in a long time, the ending of a chapter didn't feel like a collapse. It felt like a beginning written in my own handwriting.